public humiliation at the penthouse boardroom, the argument didn't begin quietly. It exploded 1 second. The room buzzed with polite corporate tension. The next, his voice cut through the glass-walled penthouse like a gunshot. "You're a worthless loser," he yelled, the words echoing off marble, steel, and money. Conversations died mid-sentence. A pen clattered to the table. Somewhere, a phone stopped recording and froze in a hand. This wasn't a private fight. This was a performance of power. Executives stared at their tablets as if salvation might be hidden in spreadsheets. Assistants held their breath, knowing careers could end in moments like this. Security stood rigid, eyes forward, trained not to react. From 40 floors above the city, the billionaire had chosen his stage, and everyone in it was a witness. She stood across from him, framed by floor 2 ceiling windows and a skyline that looked small compared to his rage. He leaned forward, jaw tight, convinced the insult would finish her. He had done this before, just never with an audience this large. In his world, volume was authority, humiliation was leverage, and silence meant victory. The silence came, thick and suffocating. Number 1 defended her. No one interrupted. Even the city outside seemed to pause, traffic like a distant hum beneath the weight of the moment. He straightened, already satisfied, already assuming the story would end the way it always had. Powerful man puts woman in her place. Meeting moose on damage contained. But something was different. She didn't flinch, her hands didn't shake, her face didn't collapse into apology or tears. Instead, her eyes lifted, slow and steady, scanning the room he thought belonged to him. For the first time, some executives actually looked at her, noticing her presence for the first time. The billionaire frowned. This wasn't the reaction he expected. His power relied on reflux, on fear arriving instantly. The longer she stayed, silent, the more unsettled the room became. A whisper of discomfort rippled through the air. She inhaled once, calmly, as if grounding herself. And in that breath, the balance of the room shifted, because everyone could feel it now. As it wasn't over, the insult hadn't ended her. It had started something. But as the room waited for her to break, to retreat, to disappear into the shadow he'd built for her, she did something no one expected. And the silence held its breath to understand why that insult landed like a verdict. You have to understand who he was. The man at the head of the table wasn't just wealthy. He was a self-made billionaire. The kind business magazines loved to mythologize. Immigrant hustle turned corporate empire. Relentless, brilliant, untouchable. His face smiled. From covers that praised vision while ignoring the wreckage left behind. Inside the company, his reputation was simpler. Fear one sentence from him could end a career. Erase decades of work, or elevate loyalty into sudden fortune. He didn't need to fire people. His words did it for him. When he spoke, rooms aligned themselves around survival. Disagreeing wasn't courage. It was professional suicide. Employees learned quickly. Laugh at his jokes, echo his opinions, never challenge him in public. Especially not in front of the board. Especially not as a woman. Especially not as his wife. And then there was her. Quiet, composed, always impeccably dressed, never demanding the spotlight. To outsiders, she appeared ornamental, a graceful accessory to his success. The media called her supportive. The executives called her harmless. In meetings she was tolerated, not consulted. It was easy to believe she lived inside his shadow. Easy to assume she stayed because she had nowhere else to stand. Easy to mistake her silence for weakness and her calm for surrender. That assumption was the foundation of his confidence. That was why the insult mattered. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a reminder of hierarchy. A signal to the room about who held power and who didn't. He believed he had defined her, publicly and permanently. They had no idea how much of empire rested with her. What no one in that room knew was who she really was. Smiled politely, who never interrupted, who sat through meetings without asserting authority. They mistook grace for absence. They mistook restraint for emptiness. No one asked what she knew. No one wondered why she was always listening. He stopped seeing her as a partner long before the rest of the world did. To him, she was replaceable, interchangeable, a reminder of a past he had outgrown. He surrounded himself with people who echoed his confidence and flattered his ego. And in that echo chamber, her sacrifices became invisible. Love turned transactional. Loyalty became expected, not honored. Every insult over the years was quieter than the last, disguised as jokes, impatience, or stress. She absorbed them because survival sometimes looks like silence. She told herself this was the cost of staying close to power, of protecting what they had built together. Years of compromise taught her how to disappear without vanishing, how to observe systems, patterns, and people without drawing attention. She learned where decisions were really made, who signed what, and which voices mattered when cameras were gone. While they underestimated her, she was collecting truth, patience, and leverage, not for revenge, but for the moment silence would no longer protect her. That moment was closer than anyone in that room could possibly imagine, waiting just beneath their arrogance and certainty. But power has a way of forgetting who helped build it. And when he finally said the words out loud, when he stripped away all pretense and called her worthless in front of everyone, something inside her snapped. The argument wasn't about ego at first. It was about numbers, spreadsheets, and a decision quietly buried beneath polished language. Layoffs disguised as restructuring, outsourced labor framed as efficiency, communities hollowed out so shareholders could smile. She had asked one question, too many, and she had asked it in front of witnesses. She pointed out the faces behind the figures, the families that would lose stability overnight. She reminded him that many of the workers were immigrants, people who had built the company's success with long hours and disposable loyalty. Her voice stayed steady, grounded in facts and ethics. She didn't accuse. She asked him to explain. He didn't. Instead, his jaw tightened, his eyes hardened, because facts were dangerous, but conscience was worse. A moral challenge threatened the myth he sold about himself. So he did what powerful men do when cornered. He shifted the battlefield. He stopped talking about the decision and started talking about her relevance, about her worth. He dismissed her concerns as emotional, naive, unqualified. He reminded the room, and her, who paid the bills and whose name sat on the building. The insult wasn't spontaneous. It was strategic. Calling her worthless was easier than answering a question. It redirected attention. It warned the room. It told every employee watching exactly what happened to anyone who questioned the machine. Anger burned beneath her calm, sharp and focused. Not because she was hurt, but because she recognized the pattern. Power refusing accountability, wealth hiding exploitation behind confidence. A man who demanded loyalty but offered none. The room leaned into the moment, unsure whether to recoil or absorb the lesson. Some executives nodded subtly, relieved the moral discomfort had been erased. Others felt the unease deepen, sensing they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth clearly for the first time. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was who he had chosen to become. Her silence stretched, heavy with meaning. And in that pause, she decided something fundamental had ended. The argument wasn't about business anymore. It was about dignity, and she was done negotiating hers. The air felt electric, like consequences arriving for everyone present. Then she spoke, quietly, deliberately, and with a certainty that cut through the room. And that's when she said 5 words that changed everything. She met him before the headlines, before the private jets and security details. Back then, he was brilliant and hungry, the kind of man who talked about changing the world with ideas instead of money. She believed in him when belief was the only currency he had. While he chased investors, she worked late, paid bills, translated contracts, and smoothed every crisis no one ever saw. She had ambitions of her own once. Education, policy, community work that centered people who were always pushed to the margins. But each step forward for him required a step back from her. Slowly, quietly, she adjusted. Her goals became supportive roles. Her voice became edits in the background. And the more powerful he grew, the smaller her presence was allowed to be. Inside the company, employees learned to read her as decoration, the elegant wife who... The room reacted the way power trains people to react. Eyes dropped. Screens became suddenly fascinating. Executives who built their careers on proximity to him chose safety over truth. A few smirked, subtle and cruel, relieved the target wasn't them. Others shifted in their seats, discomfort flickering, but silence won. No one spoke for her. Not one voice interrupted. The hierarchy had frozen the room in place, invisible but absolute. Everyone understood the rule. Survive first, question later. Challenging him meant exile. Agreeing with him meant staying employed. He noticed the silence and mistook it for loyalty. His shoulders relaxed. He leaned back, satisfied, already rewriting the moment in his head as dominance reasserted. This was how it always ended. He humiliated. The room complied. Power restored. Somewhere, an assistant's phone vibrated with a message they wouldn't answer. A legal counsel glanced toward the door, calculating risk. The board chair stared at the table, pretending neutrality was professionalism. Silence wasn't passive. It was participation. He took one step closer to her, voice lower now, confident. He thought the moment had passed, that the room had absorbed the lesson, that she would retreat the way everyone else did when confronted with power this raw. But something fundamental had shifted. The room didn't feel settled, it felt brittle, like glass stretched too thin, waiting for pressure. She stood unmoving, eyes steady, refusing the role they had assigned her. He believed this was the end of her defiance, the point where resistance collapsed under collective cowardice. He was already moving on, already certain of victory. Across the table, something unspoken passed between a few witnesses, a flicker of doubt they quickly buried. They sensed history bending, even if they refused to name it. The air thickened with consequence, with the knowledge that moments like this never vanish. They echo, they resurface, and when they do, everyone must answer for where they stood. Some would remember this silence as wisdom, others as fear, but none would escape the reckoning quietly. Waiting beyond the glass walls of that towering room above the city, he was wrong. 6. Her calm response shakes him sheathed and raised her voice. She didn't apologize. She didn't move toward the door. When she finally spoke, it was calm enough to feel dangerous. The room leaned in without realizing it. Power expected emotion. It expected mess. What it got was control. She thanked him for clarifying how he felt. The words landed softly, almost politely, and that politeness unsettled him more than defiance ever could. She said she now understood the company's direction, the values guiding its decisions, and the cost he was willing to assign to human lives. Her tone was measured, factual, impossible to dismiss as hysteria. He tried to interrupt, but she continued, unshaken. She reminded him that stability wasn't built on fear forever, that markets shifted, loyalty fractured, and reputations cracked. When truth surfaced, she didn't accuse him of corruption. She spoke as if discussing inevitability. Around the table, executives straightened. This wasn't an emotional outburst they could ignore. This was a recalibration. Her calm reframed the moment, transforming his outburst into evidence. He felt it slipping, the narrative control he'd always relied on. She looked at the glass walls, the skyline he loved to claim as proof of his dominance. She spoke about structures, not people, about foundations, not facades, about how empires fell not from attack, but from internal decay and overconfidence. Every word widened the distance between his power and its permanence. For the first time, he searched her face for weakness and found none. No trembling hands, no wavering voice, just certainty, the kind that didn't need permission. She spoke without urgency, as if time itself was on her side. She reminded the room that contracts outlive tempers, that signatures remembered what mouths denied, and that history rarely favored those who confused dominance with permanence. Each sentence landed like a weight, pressing the silence deeper, making witnesses aware they were part of something irreversible now, ready or not. The room felt colder. Phones stayed down. No one dared break the spell. She had turned his insult into a pause, his authority into a question. He laughed, sharp and forced, but it rang hollow. He told himself this was posturing, nothing more. Still, something twisted in his chest. Because beneath her calm was knowledge, and knowledge was the one thing money couldn't silence. For the first time, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar, something creeping in beneath his confidence and certainty. Fear. 7. Secrets. Beneath the fortune she didn't announce what she knew. She revealed it piece by piece, like facts that had always existed, waiting for the room to catch up. She spoke of documents she had reviewed for years, signatures she had watched being signed without question, decisions rooted through her name because it was convenient, because she was trusted, because no one imagined she mattered. She reminded them that while he courted investors and cameras, she handled structure, compliance, risk, the unglamorous work that made growth possible. She referenced offshore entities not as threats, but as realities, frameworks assembled carefully, legally, quietly. Her voice never sharpened. It didn't need to. Faces around the table changed. Legal counsel stiffened. The CFO stopped taking notes. People who had dismissed her presence began replaying meetings in their heads, moments they hadn't understood until now. This wasn't new information. It was newly visible information. She explained that power often hides where attention doesn't go, that authority isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it sits beside you for years while you underestimate it. She wasn't bragging. She was correcting a misunderstanding. He tried to interject again, but his words tangled. The confidence that once carried him faltered under specificity. Dates, clauses, structures. She knew them all. Not because she was curious, but because she had helped build them. She said it plainly then. Much of what held the company together legally rested on her oversight, her approvals, her consent. Not as a favor, as a function. The empire he claimed as his alone was supported by foundations he never bothered to examine. The room felt smaller now, the skyline pressing in through the glass. People realized they weren't watching a marriage unravel. They weren't watching a myth collapse. She paused, letting the truth settle without drama or cruelty. There was no triumph in her expression, only clarity, the kind that arrives when patience finally meets opportunity. And then she did the unthinkable, not behind closed doors, not in whispers, but in full view of everyone who had mistaken her silence for weakness. And in that instant, the boardroom understood that whatever she was about to do next would not be reversible, not manageable, and not something his money, his temper, or his reputation could contain. Every person present sensed consequences approaching, and none of them could pretend anymore that this was ordinary at all. 8. The moment Pawlowski stood, letting the weight of her presence settle over the room. Every eye followed her, some out of curiosity, some out of dread. Then she spoke, calm but absolute. She was invoking her authority, exercising rights no one had realized she had, making decisions that could no longer be ignored. Accounts would be frozen, contracts would be reviewed, an emergency board session would be convened immediately. Every word landed like a hammer striking marble. Whispers erupted around the table. Executives shifted uneasily, phones appearing from sleeves and handbags as the first realization hit. She had power they hadn't accounted for. The very instruments of control they thought belonged to him could be redirected, frozen, or questioned. And she was the one holding the key. He laughed at first, sharp and incredulous, confident the room would still obey him. But the laughter faded. It clashed with reality. Numbers didn't bend to arrogance. Signatures didn't obey threats. His empire, meticulously polished for public admiration, depended on legal structures she had mastered, structures she was now activating without hesitation. The murmurs grew louder. Phones tapped out messages to colleagues. Heads bent toward screens, trying to verify what was happening before their eyes. Social hierarchies began to wobble. Those who had once scoffed at her presence now leaned forward, recognizing that this wasn't a rehearsal. This was a reordering of power, and it was happening faster than anyone could process. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply executed authority she had always held, quietly but decisively, turning expectation on its head. The room that had assumed she was decorative, inconsequential, suddenly realized she had been the foundation all along. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every whispered assumption dissolved in the face of her command. And he, who had once defined reality in that room, realized too late that control was slipping. His words, his temper, his intimidation, none of it could counteract the legal and procedural truth she wielded. The moment the boardroom understood, the ripple extended outward, unstoppable. By the time the meeting ended, his name was already trending. By the afternoon, the city had caught up to what the boardroom already knew. Employees whispered in hallways, in elevators, in offices that once felt safe under his shadow. The video of the outburst, the words, the fury, the public humiliation. We had leaked. Clips circulated online, edited, shared, replayed. The billionaire's voice, meant to dominate in silence, now echoed as evidence of arrogance and cruelty. Alongside the viral footage came the revelations she had unveiled. Documents, authority, structures she controlled, proof that the empire he flaunted as his own rested in no small part on her oversight. Comments and captions framed it plainly. He called her worthless. She built everything. The public, long accustomed to wealth unchallenged, paused. This was not a scandal of greed alone. This was a lesson in misjudged power. Within the company, reactions were immediate. Some employees quietly celebrated relief and admiration, flickering in eyes that had learned fear too well. Others froze, unsure where allegiance now lay. Board members reviewed messages and reports, realizing they had witnessed history in the making. Social media wasn't just talking, it was weighing judgment. Hashtags multiplied, sharing the narrative of humiliation and empowerment. Opinions spread faster than press releases, faster than controlled statements. Even he, who had once believed his word-shaped perception, felt it unravel. Headlines paired his outburst with the undeniable truth of a competence. Memes and threads ridiculed his temper. Analysts dissected his behavior. Journalists who had once praised his vision now questioned his leadership. The man who thought a single yell could assert authority was publicly undone, exposed by the very person he had dismissed. Yet, amidst the chaos, she remained composed. She didn't taunt. She didn't amplify the spectacle. She let the evidence speak, letting truth circulate faster than any reputation he could protect. Vindication didn't come from anger or revenge. It came from recognition of what had always been hers. She had been underestimated, overshadowed, and dismissed, but now the world could see the foundation she had always been. And as the city watched, as followers shared clips and retold the story, it became clear the narrative had shifted entirely. His power had been publicly challenged, and for the first time, he realized the consequences of underestimating someone he thought he controlled. But the most powerful moment hadn't happened yet. Behind the closed doors of his office, the world outside continued its frenzy, but inside, silence pressed heavy. He sank into the chair he had always commanded, staring at the polished wood, as if it could offer answers money never could. Charts, contracts, and accounts surrounded him, proof of wealth without respect, of power without loyalty. For the first time, control slipped through his fingers, unnoticed until now. She stood across from him, composed, steady, unwavering. No triumph, no anger, just truth, clear and precise, cutting deeper than any yell could. Her presence alone reminded him that authority isn't inherited, It's earned, and he had misjudged entirely where the real leverage lay. He opened his mouth, but no words restored the facade. Every instinct that had once commanded obedience now faltered. Wealth and status could not compensate for moral and procedural reality. She didn't. We need to speak louder or faster. Her quiet certainty amplified itself, resonating in a way that power alone never could. And then she delivered the final line. I believed in your vision. I believed in your promises. I believed we could build something together, she said, voice steady, eyes unwavering. But I no longer believe in fear. I no longer believe in intimidation. I no longer believe that power is measured by who you can crush. Her words didn't shout. They didn't need to. Each syllable carried weight, clarity, and conviction. In that moment, worth wasn't defined by wealth or title. Success wasn't measured by domination, and dignity wasn't something he could take. She reclaimed it quietly, completely, for herself and for every silent witness who had ever been underestimated. Those words echoed louder than his ever did. True power isn't measured in wealth, titles, or the volume of your voice. It lives in self-worth, integrity, and the courage to stand when the world expects you to bow. Quiet strength outlasts rage, and dignity outshines dominance.